For the readings for today, for Good Friday, we have the beautiful reflection by St. John, so the Passion according to St. John. And I want to spend some time talking about that, but I'm going to base my comments on the response for the psalm, in which Jesus says to the Father, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. And so what we see in the Gospel of John is this trading over, this handing over back and forth, where Jesus is handed over to the priests, the chief priests. He's handed over by Judas to the chief priests. The chief priests send him over to Ananias, send him back to Caiaphas. Caiaphas hands him over to Pilate. And so this word handing over seems like it has a very negative sense in the Gospel of John, because Jesus is being handed over to sinners who are going to do what sinners do to God ultimately, which is crucify him. But it also, from the responsorial psalm, we see that it has this positive meaning, right? Where Jesus hands his spirit over to the Father. And the root of this word, that is the verb in Greek and the Gospels, in Latin, that word becomes translated as traditio. The noun would be traditio, which is the word that we get tradition from. And so tradition is what is handed over to the church from Jesus and then handed on from the apostles throughout the history of the church. But we can see that it also has this more Christological meaning, this meaning that really refers to Jesus's existence among us, Jesus's existence as the Son of God living among human beings and saving us ultimately. But even that Christological meaning, so Christological meaning centered in Christ, so that Christological meaning has this deeper Trinitarian meaning that we see in the response to the psalm. So Jesus says, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. He hands over his spirit to the Father. One way that we can see this word used also in the Gospels in reference to the Father is when Jesus speaks about the fact that the Father has handed all things over to the Son. So this is what one theologian calls God's primordial tradition, that there's this handing over of all things from the Father to the Son. And then when the Son becomes incarnate as man, he hands over all of those things to us in the church. But we see, of course, what happens when the Son comes and hands over the Father's things to us is that we want to crucify him, right? And so that's part of what we enter into more deeply today in the church's liturgy, because the church's liturgy puts us right in there with the crowd yelling, crucify him. And so the gifts that God has handed to us in the church, what do we do with those gifts? Do we ignore them? Do we shout, crucify him? You know, the place where Jesus is most handed over to us every day in this very vulnerable way is the Eucharist, where he pours himself out over and over again for us in this sacrament of the Eucharist. And how do we receive that? Do we receive it like this gift, that we're participating in this full gift of himself, that we're able to receive this full gift of himself, the way the Father gave all of himself to the Son? Or do we just treat it as something that's just maybe an empty ritual, or maybe it's something that we don't even partake in at all? So the Good Friday readings, the whole Good Friday liturgy, ask us to really ask those questions more deeply. What do I do when Jesus is handed over to me? And do I receive him, and then do I hand him over to others, continuing that good tradition of handing on Jesus? Or do I act like the sinners? Do I say, crucify him? Do I shut him out from my life? And so on Good Friday, when we venerate the cross, when we listen to the Passion readings, these are things that we can bring to that reflection, so that when, as we continue the mysteries that we celebrate at the end of Lent and beginning of Easter, we can hopefully come to Easter where though our sinful inclinations have really been buried with Christ, so that we can rise to the new life that he came to give us.